He slid a marriage contract across a coffee-stained table, his voice calm and cold. "Marry me for 30 days, he said. No love, no strings. She thought it was a joke, until she saw the signature line, already waiting for her name. Millionaire asked a coffee girl to be his fake bride, but she changed his life forever. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please take a second to hit subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss our newest cinematic romance. Where are you watching from, YouTube, Facebook, or TikTok? Leave a comment and let us know. Now, let us go back to our main character. The rain had not stopped all morning. Drops slid down the coffee shop window, tracing shaky lines over the reflection of Lena Park, 27, a barista with a half-tied ponytail and sleeves rolled to her elbows. The smell of espresso mixed with the damp air every time the door opened. She wiped the counter, counting tips that barely filled her palm, and whispered, "Just one more week, Mom. I will send the hospital payment soon." That was when Adrian Blake walked in. Tall, sharply dressed, the kind of man who looked like he belonged on magazine covers, not in a neighborhood cafe. His navy suit carried the faint scent of rain and expensive leather. He glanced around once, then straight at her. "Black coffee," he said, voice low but steady. She nodded, grabbing a cup, not noticing the folder in his hand until he placed it on the counter cream paper, embossed gold seal. "Legal documents." "You look nervous," she said, forcing a polite smile. "I am," he replied, meeting her eyes. "I am about to make the strangest business offer of my life." She laughed lightly, trying to brush it off. "Sir, I only sell coffee, not contracts." He did not smile. "Then today, make an exception." He opened the folder and slid one page toward her. Across the top, in bold letters, it read, "Marriage agreement." Lena blinked. "Is this some kind of prank?" Adrian leaned forward slightly, his tone precise, almost detached. "My grandmother is gravely ill. Her final wish is to see me married before her birthday next month. I need someone real enough to convince her, discreet enough to keep the secret. You will be compensated fairly. 30 days. No romance. No publicity." Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. "Why me?" He studied her face for a moment. "Because you look like someone who keeps her word." For a long second, only the hiss of the espresso machine filled the silence. Lena looked at the contract, then at him, his eyes tired, honest in a way that startled her. It felt absurd, impossible, yet something in his voice sounded desperate. "You do not even know my last name," she murmured. "Then tell me," he said softly, "so I can write it next to mine." The pen rested between them. The rain outside grew heavier, blurring the city into silver streaks. Lena exhaled, torn between reason and the pull of something she could not name. 30 days, she repeated. Adrian nodded once. "Starting tomorrow." Her hand trembled as she reached for the pen. The moment the ink touched paper, her ordinary life dissolved into a story she never thought she would live. Outside, thunder rolled above Manhattan, and inside that tiny cafe, a billionaire and a coffee girl sealed a contract that neither of them realized would change everything. That night, the rain followed Lena home. She rode the late subway, contract folder pressed against her chest as if it could keep her warm. The city blurred outside the window, all silver lights and strangers who never looked up. When she reached her small apartment, the ceiling leaked again. Her roommate was gone for the week, leaving silence and the steady drip of water into a pan on the floor. Lena placed the folder on the table. The paper still smelled faintly of coffee and rain. She opened it again, reading the bold words, "Marriage agreement between Adrian Blake and Lena Park." Her reflection stared back from the glass frame above the table, pale and uncertain. It was insane. Completely insane. Yet the numbers were real enough to pay off her mother's hospital bills and save the cafe. Her phone buzzed. A message from the hospital. "Payment due in 3 days to continue treatment." Her chest tightened. She stared at the message until her eyes burned. Then she looked at the signature line again. Adrian Blake. The same man who had barely smiled, who had offered her a fortune with a voice that sounded more lonely than powerful. By morning, she had made her decision. She showed up at the address printed on the contract, Blake Tower, downtown Manhattan, 40 floors of glass and steel reaching into the fog. The receptionist looked surprised when she said her name, but handed her a guest pass without question. Adrian waited in his office, back turned to the skyline. Sunlight fell across the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the room gold. When he turned, she noticed he looked tired, as if sleep had not visited him all night. "You came," he said simply. "I read the contract again," Lena replied. "It is legal, but it feels like signing my life away." He nodded. "It is only 30 days, no contact beyond public appearances. After that, you can walk away with full payment." She folded her arms. "And what do you get from this, really?" "Time," he said quietly, "and my grandmother's peace of mind." He gestured to the document on the table. "If you agree, sign it now. My lawyer will handle the rest." Her hand hovered above the pen. "You said no romance, no publicity. I meant every word. And if I fall in love with you?" she asked, half joking, half testing. His eyes flickered for the first time, a faint crack in his composure. "Then, that would be a problem I am not prepared to solve." She signed. The pen left a soft trail of ink that felt heavier than her entire life. He reached into a small box and slid a ring toward her simple silver, nothing extravagant. "This is just for show," he said. "I know," she whispered. Still, the metal felt warm when it touched her skin. Within an hour, his driver dropped her off at a boutique for fitting. 2 assistants fluttered around her with measuring tapes and fabrics that shimmered under the lights. "You are the fiancé of Adrian Blake," one of them said breathlessly, as if it were a fairy tale. Lena barely heard them. Her mind spun between disbelief and fear. The woman in the mirror wore satin and diamonds, but her hands still smelled like roasted beans and soap. She thought of her mother's hospital bed, the unpaid bills, the cafe lights that might stay on another month. When the fitting was done, the driver handed her a small envelope. Inside was a card in Adrian's handwriting. "Dinner at 7. Do not be late. Bring the contract." That evening, she stood outside a restaurant, so elegant, it seemed to glow from within. As the valet opened the door, she caught her reflection once more, dress perfect, hair pinned, eyes uncertain. Inside, Adrian rose from the table, the same calm expression on his face. "Miss Park," he greeted. "Mr. Blake," she replied, trying to match his tone. They sat, the world of chandeliers and crystal glass between them. He spoke about logistics appearances, schedules, charity events, every word measured, every emotion locked away. Then, as the waiter left, he looked at her more softly. "You are not what I expected," he said. She blinked. "What did you expect?" "Someone who would say yes for the money," he answered. Not someone who looked like she was saving her soul. For the first time, she smiled without fear. "Maybe I am doing both." Outside, the city lights shimmered like promises. Inside, 2 strangers began the strangest partnership of their lives, signed on paper, but already starting to feel dangerously real. 3 days later, Lena stood in the marble lobby of Blake Tower, holding her breath as the elevator doors slid open. The city outside roared, but inside the tower, everything felt muted, controlled. She was there to finalize what Adrian called the formalities. When the elevator reached the top floor, she stepped out into a hallway lined with black glass. A tall man in a gray suit waited. "Mr. Blake's attorney," he introduced himself. "We will go over the clauses one last time." Lena followed him into the conference room. Adrian was already there, leaning against the table, reading something on his tablet. When he looked up, his face was unreadable. "Good morning, Miss Park," he said. "Morning," she answered softly. The lawyer spread the contract open and began reading each clause, his tone dry and professional. "Clause 1. No physical intimacy outside of agreed public gestures." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Public gestures?" Adrian glanced up. "Hand-holding. A kiss on the cheek, perhaps. Nothing beyond what looks natural." She nodded, cheeks warm. "Clause 2. Both parties must attend 3 public events together: family gathering, business gala, and charity dinner. Clause 3. No interference in each other's personal or professional affairs. Clause 4. Media silence. No interviews, no leaks, no photographs without consent. Clause 5. Termination, after 30 days, with full compensation transferred immediately. The lawyer placed the pen between them. Do you both agree to these terms? Adrian looked at her, his expression calm but watchful. I do, Lena said quietly. I do, he echoed, signing first. When it was her turn, she took a deep breath and signed her name beneath his. The moment the ink dried, the lawyer gathered the papers, nodded, and left them alone. For a long time, neither spoke. The tension felt almost fragile. Then, Adrian reached into his pocket and placed a small velvet box on the table. Inside lay a simple silver ring. Wear it for appearances, he said. Lena picked it up, turning it in her fingers. The metal caught the morning light. It is beautiful, she murmured. It is practical, he replied, but his tone had softened. He reached for her hand, slipping the ring onto her finger. For one brief second, his thumb brushed her skin, and both of them froze. The air between them shifted quick, quiet, and dangerous. When she pulled her hand back, he cleared his throat. You will move into my residence tonight. The press will be informed in 2 days. Until then, we prepare. Prepare? She asked. Training, he said simply. You will need to learn how to walk, talk, and behave like someone who has lived in my world all her life. By evening, she found herself in his penthouse, surrounded by stylists, assistants, and clothes that probably cost more than her cafe's monthly rent. The view stretched over the glittering city, cold and magnificent. Do not let them intimidate you, Adrian said, watching her from the doorway. They work for you now. That is the problem, she said, half under her breath. I have never had anyone work for me, he smiled faintly. Then you will learn fast. Hours later, when everyone left, Lena wandered to the window. The skyline shimmered, but she felt small inside it. Adrian was across the room, loosening his tie. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken questions. Why me, Adrian? She asked finally. Out of everyone, why a coffee girl? He looked at her for a long time before answering. Because when you handed me that cup of coffee, you did not look at my money. You looked at me like I was just another tired man. Her chest tightened. And what are you now? A man hoping this lie can make something right, he said quietly. She turned back to the city lights, her reflection merging with his in the glass. 2 people bound by paper, pretending to belong together, yet already standing. Too close for it to be entirely pretend. Somewhere far below, car horns echoed through the night. Above it all, the contract that began as a transaction now felt like the first tremor of something neither of them could control. The next morning began with the sound of voices and the flash of cameras outside the Blake residence. The news had broken. Adrian Blake, Billionaire CEO, engaged to a mystery woman. Inside the penthouse, Lena sat stiffly at the dining table while a team of stylists worked around her. A woman with sharp eyeliner held up a gown. You will wear this for the gala tonight, she said. It is from the Paris collection. Do not spill anything on it. Lena nodded, her nerves tight. Across the room, Adrian adjusted his cufflinks, already dressed in a charcoal suit that looked carved to fit him. They can be intense, he said quietly, noticing her unease. Ignore them. They do not care about you, only the image you create. I am not used to being anyone's image, she replied. He smiled faintly. Then be yourself. That may work better than pretending. Hours later, a car pulled up to the grand staircase of the Hudson Regency Hotel. Golden lights spilled across the red carpet as reporters shouted questions. Adrian stepped out first, calm as ever, and turned back to offer his hand. Lena hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand in his. Flash bulbs exploded around them. The crowd gasped softly when he rested his palm at the small of her back, a calculated gesture for the cameras, but her pulse quickened anyway. Inside the ballroom, music flowed and champagne sparkled. Every glance felt like a judgment. Adrian introduced her to a circle of executives, their smiles polished but their eyes sharp. "This is Lena," he said. "My fiancée." One of the older men chuckled. "You move quickly, Adrian. Last quarter you were married to your work." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Work is still my first love," he said, evenly. "But sometimes love shows up in unexpected places." Lena tried to play along, keeping her posture straight, repeating the etiquette lessons from the stylist. When a waiter passed with a tray, she reached for a glass of champagne and nearly tipped it over onto the pristine tablecloth. Adrian caught it just in time, his hand steadying hers. "You are fine," he whispered. "Just breathe." She nodded, cheeks warm. The night moved on in a blur of introductions and questions. But when the gala's host called them to the center stage for a photo, a journalist shouted from the crowd, "Miss Park, what does a barista know about living in a billionaire's world?" The words struck like ice. A few guests laughed softly. Adrian started to speak, but Lena raised her hand gently. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "Coffee teaches patience," she said. "And kindness. Maybe that is all I need to survive in any world." The ballroom went silent. Then applause rippled across the room. Adrian turned to her, something new flickering in his eyes, pride, maybe even admiration. When the evening ended, they stepped outside to the cool night air. The city lights stretched endlessly ahead. Adrian removed his tie, his expression softening. "You handled yourself perfectly," he said. "I thought you would be angry," she admitted. "I would be lying if I said I was not nervous," he replied. "But I meant what I said before the cameras. Sometimes love does show up in unexpected places." She looked away, the wind brushing her hair. "Careful, Mr. Blake," she said quietly. "That almost sounded real." He smiled, but his eyes lingered on her longer than they should have. Maybe it was. They rode home in silence, the distance between them shrinking with every mile. When they reached the penthouse, Lena stepped out first, the gown catching the faint glow of the streetlights. Adrian followed, his gaze still on her. For the first time, the city did not feel cold. It felt alive, humming with something fragile and new. The lie they had signed into existence was beginning to breathe on its own, and neither of them could pretend not to notice. Upstairs, she placed the ring on the nightstand before washing off her makeup. It was supposed to be a symbol, a piece of theater, but as she looked at it under the lamplight, she realized it already carried weight. In another room, Adrian stood by the window, watching the reflection of her silhouette pass down the hallway. He told himself it was just part of the deal, just another performance. But deep down, he knew the truth. The act was starting to feel too real. The next morning, headlines covered every screen in the city. Billionaire Adrian Blake and his mysterious fiancée steal the spotlight at Hudson Gala. Photos of Adrian's hand resting gently on Lena's back spread across social media, each caption twisting the story in a different way. Inside the penthouse, Lena stood by the window, staring down at the chaos of reporters on the street. "They make it sound like a fairy tale," she murmured. "Except no one asked the girl if she wanted to be in it." Adrian was at the table, scrolling through his phone. "Ignore them," he said calmly. "They will move on when they find someone new to chase." "That easy for you?" she asked, turning to face him. "You grew up in this world. I am still learning how to breathe in it." He looked up. "And you are doing better than most people I know." That night, the second event on their list arrived, a charity dinner hosted by the Blake Foundation. The ballroom was brighter, the crowd larger, and the tension heavier. Everyone wanted to meet the woman who had somehow captured the city's most unreachable bachelor. As they entered, cameras flashed like lightning. Lena held her smile, repeating Adrian's words in her head, "Be calm, be yourself." He led her to their table, introducing her to board members, donors, and distant relatives. At first, everything went smoothly. She laughed at polite jokes, nodded at compliments, and managed to balance her fork without spilling anything. But as the dinner progressed, the questions grew sharper. "So, Miss Park," a woman in pearls asked, "where did you and Adrian meet?" "At a coffee shop," Lena replied honestly. "He came in one morning, and—" The woman interrupted with a thin smile. "How romantic. From barista to bride in a month. That must be some special blend. Laughter rippled around the table. Lena froze, her smile fading. Adrian's hand brushed hers under the table, a quiet signal to stay calm. He turned to the woman, voice measured but cold. Do not confuse humility with weakness, Mrs. Grant. The woman beside me has more grace than half this room combined. The table fell silent. The woman looked away, embarrassed. Lena exhaled slowly, grateful but shaken. Later in the evening, a stage light malfunctioned, throwing the room into brief darkness. When the lights flickered back, a child from the foundation, nervous, clutching a card, stood at the microphone. He was supposed to thank the donors but froze mid-sentence, eyes wide. Without hesitation, Lena walked up, knelt beside him, and whispered softly. Together, they finished the speech. The audience applauded, moved by the moment. Adrian watched from the crowd, something shifting quietly inside him. When she returned to the table, he leaned close. That was not in the plan, he said. Neither was the broken light, she replied. Sometimes plans need saving. He laughed softly, the first genuine sound of joy she had heard from him. You are impossible to predict, and you like control too much, she said, teasing. Maybe, he admitted, still smiling. The rest of the night passed in a haze of music and conversation. People approached them with newfound admiration, whispering how genuine they looked together. By the end of the evening, it no longer felt like an act. When they stepped outside, the air was cool and gentle. The driver opened the car door, but Adrian paused, glancing at the stars above the hotel. Let us walk, he said. They walked along the quiet street, heels clicking against the pavement, city lights reflecting off puddles from an earlier rain. I saw the way you looked at that kid, he said after a moment. You reminded me why I started the foundation in the first place. And why is that? To prove that kindness can change something even when money cannot. She smiled faintly. Then maybe you are not as cold as people say. He looked at her, his expression softer than she had ever seen. Maybe you are not as temporary as this contract says. For a moment, neither spoke. The city hummed around them, alive and distant. The line between truth and pretending blurred completely. When their hands brushed, neither pulled away. By the time they reached the car, it was no longer just a performance for the cameras. It was something fragile, something real, and both of them knew it, though neither dared to say it aloud. The next evening, the city was quieter than usual. The charity dinner had ended with headlines praising the couple's grace and authenticity. For once, the press seemed kind. But inside the penthouse, the world felt very small. Lena sat on the balcony, her hair loose, a cup of tea growing cold beside her. Adrian appeared in the doorway, his jacket off, the top button of his shirt undone. You should be asleep, he said. I could say the same to you, she replied softly. He walked closer, stopping beside her. The city stretched beneath them, lights flickering like a sea of stars. When I was a kid, he said quietly, my mother used to bring me up here. She said this view could make any problem look small. But somehow, the older I got, the smaller the world felt. Lena looked at him. Because money builds walls, she said, and sometimes you forget how to look over them. He nodded slowly. You are probably right. For a while, they stood in silence, listening to the hum of the city below. Then Adrian turned toward her, his expression softer than she had ever seen. You know, he said, for someone who claims she does not belong here, you handle everything with more grace than people who grew up in this life. I have been pretending, she said. Pretending to be someone else, pretending I am not terrified every time a camera flashes. He smiled faintly. Pretending suits you less than honesty. She laughed under her breath. That is because honesty does not pay the bills. Adrian leaned against the railing, looking at her. You keep saying that. But every time you talk about your mother, your cafe, or the people who come to buy your coffee, your eyes light up. You care about things that do not give you profit. That is why people listen to you. The wind lifted a strand of her hair. He reached out instinctively, brushing it away from her face. His hand lingered for a moment too long. Sorry, he said quickly, stepping back. It is fine, she murmured. though her heartbeat had already given her away. Inside, an old record spun on the turntable, soft jazz filling the room. Lena turned to him, half smiling. "You still listen to vinyl? It is the only sound that feels real," he said. "Digital music is too perfect. It forgets to breathe." She walked toward the record player, tracing a finger over the sleeve. "Ella Fitzgerald," she read aloud. "My grandmother used to play this." Adrian watched her carefully. "Then dance with me." She looked at him, startled. "What?" He stepped forward, offering his hand. "No cameras, no contracts. Just one dance." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. The world outside vanished as the melody wrapped around them. His arm rested lightly at her waist. Her other hand settled on his shoulder. Neither spoke. The rhythm carried them across the room in slow, unplanned movements. For the first time since their agreement began, Lena felt safe not as an actress in someone else's life, but as herself. Adrian's eyes stayed on her, soft and searching, as if he were trying to memorize something he did not want to forget. When the song ended, neither moved away. The silence was heavy but gentle. "You make this place feel like home," he said quietly. "And you make me forget I am only here for 30 days, she whispered. Their words hung between them like a secret. He exhaled slowly, stepping back, his voice low. "We should both be careful. Feelings were not part of the agreement." "I know," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "But feelings never read contracts." Adrian looked at her one last time before turning off the light. "Good night, Lena." "Good night, Adrian," she whispered. When the door closed, she stood alone in the dim light, the echo of the music still in the air. For the first time, she realized she no longer knew where the act ended and the truth began. The contract might have rules, but the heart had already started breaking them. The following week began with silence. Adrian left early for meetings, and Lena spent most of her days alone in the penthouse, answering polite calls from his assistant and avoiding the growing number of reporters outside. The air between them had shifted since that night of dancing. It was warmer, but also more fragile, like glass under pressure. On Friday morning, everything cracked. A headline appeared across every major news outlet. Adrian Blake's fake marriage exposed. Beneath it was a photo of their signed contract, stamped and dated, leaked to the press. The story spread faster than they could breathe. Lena froze, her hands trembling as she read. The article called her a gold digger, a fraud, a liar who tricked the city's most powerful man. Reporters swarmed the front of the building within the hour. Adrian burst into the apartment, phone pressed to his ear, anger in every movement. "I do not know how this got out," he said, his voice tight. "The legal department is already on it." "Everyone knows," she whispered. "Your company, your board, your grandmother," he cut her off. "I will handle it." "Handle it?" she snapped. "They think I used you for money, Adrian. They think this was my idea." He stared at her, guilt flickering behind his eyes. "I will fix it, I promise." But the damage was already done. By evening, the Blake Foundation froze its projects. Investors demanded answers, and the board threatened to remove him as CEO if he did not clear the scandal within 24 hours. Lena tried to speak, but he was already drowning in phone calls, reporters, and legal threats. When the chaos slowed, he found her standing by the elevator, her suitcase beside her. "Where are you going?" he asked, voice low. "Back to my life," she said. "You wanted someone real, and now you have it. Real problems, real consequences. You cannot just leave," he said. "We can fight this." She shook her head. "You can fight. I do not belong in this war." The elevator doors opened, the light casting a glow around her. For a moment, she hesitated, looking at him one last time. "Maybe this is what we both needed," she said softly. "To remember what truth costs." The doors closed, leaving him alone in the vast quiet. He stood there, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt meaningless. Outside, cameras flashed as Lena stepped into a cab, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. The contract had promised no love and no loss, but in the end, it had delivered both. 2 days later, the storm reached its peak. The media tore Adrian apart, accusing him of manipulating investors, lying to the public, and staging a fake marriage for publicity. His board demanded his resignation, and his grandmother's health took a sharp decline after seeing the news. Inside his office, Adrian sat alone. The city roared outside, but his world was silent. On the table lay the shredded remains of the contract, the same one that had once promised to solve everything. He realized now that it had only built a cage. His phone buzzed. It was his lawyer. "We traced the leak," the voice said. "It came from Victoria Lang's office." Adrian's jaw tightened. His ex-fiancée, the same woman who had once managed his company's public relations, had orchestrated everything. She wanted revenge for the engagement that humiliated her in front of investors. He stood, grabbed his coat, and walked straight to the press conference the board had arranged. When he stepped onto the stage, hundreds of flashes exploded. The crowd shouted questions, demanding answers. He raised his hand, calm and steady. "Yes," he began, his voice carrying through the chaos. "The marriage began as a contract. It was meant to protect my grandmother's last wish. But what none of you know is that the woman you are calling a liar is the only honest thing that has ever happened to me." The room went silent. Every reporter froze, their microphones trembling in their hands. Adrian continued, "Lena Park did not take my money. She did not want fame. She wanted to save her family and her small cafe. If there is blame to carry, it is mine. I created the lie. She only tried to make it human." He looked straight into the cameras. "From this moment forward, I am resigning as CEO of Blake Industries. I am also donating half of my shares to the Small Hands Foundation. Let this be my apology to the people who believed in me and to the woman who taught me what truth actually means." Outside the hall, a screen in a small cafe flickered. Lena was behind the counter, cleaning tables when she heard his voice. She turned, frozen, watching the man she once thought she had lost. His confession echoed through the speakers, raw and unguarded. When the conference ended, the world reacted instantly. Headlines changed. The scandal shifted. The woman they had mocked was now the symbol of integrity. That evening, the foundation released a statement confirming the donation. Adrian disappeared from public view, leaving the city whispering about a billionaire who had chosen love over legacy. In her cafe, Lena wiped away a tear, her hands trembling as she placed 2 cups of coffee on the counter, the same blend she had served him the day they met. The rain outside was falling again, just as it had that morning. Only this time, it sounded like something ending and something beginning. 6 months passed. Winter melted into early spring, and the city slowly forgot the scandal that had once filled its screens. The Blake name remained, but Adrian had vanished from the headlines. He spent his days working quietly with the foundation, rebuilding what truly mattered. Across town, Lena's Brew stood on a quiet corner of Brooklyn. The little cafe had been repaired and reopened with help from an anonymous donation, though Lena already knew who it came from. Every morning she served regulars, smiled at strangers, and tried to convince herself that the past had finally settled. But sometimes, when the bell above the door chimed, she still found herself looking up, expecting him to walk in. One late afternoon, she was closing up when the bell rang again. A familiar voice said softly, "2 sugars, no rules." Her breath caught. Adrian stood at the door, rain on his shoulders, holding 2 cups from a nearby shop. "You beat me to it," he said with a small smile. She wiped her hands on her apron, unsure if she should laugh or cry. "You should not be here. The city still talks. Let them talk," he said. "They have already taken enough from both of us. I just came for coffee and maybe for you." She exhaled slowly. "You gave up everything, Adrian. The company, your title, why?" "Because none of it mattered," he said. "You told me once that money builds walls." I finally tore mine down. He reached into his coat pocket and placed a small box on the counter. Inside was the same silver ring he had once called just for show, now engraved on the inside with 3 simple words, "No more pretending." Lena looked at him, eyes bright with tears. "This is not a contract," she said softly. "No," he replied, his voice steady. "This is a promise. One I want to make without lawyers or lies." The cafe was quiet except for the steady rhythm of the rain. He stepped closer. Marry me, Lena. For real this time. She laughed through the tears. You still remember how I like my coffee? Always, he said. Strong, simple, and honest. She reached across the counter, taking his hand. Then yes, she whispered. No contracts. No secrets. Just us. Outside, the rain turned to sunlight breaking through the clouds, scattering gold across the windows. He slipped the ring onto her finger once more, this time without hesitation. As the door closed behind them, the sign above the cafe flickered softly. Open. The story that began with a lie had found its truth. And in a world obsessed with power and perfection, two people had finally learned that love, real love, does not need an agreement. It only needs a choice.